the weird habits of King Henry VIII that will shock you. Everyone knows the wives, the beheadings, but the real story isn't in the scandals, they're in the shadows. He bathed in wine, feared raindrops, and believed raw meat could keep his leg from rotting. He put a pig on trial, slept surrounded by burning candles, and drank powdered human remains like tea. This wasn't just royalty, it was ritual, madness dressed in velvet. And the strangest part? History barely mentions it. The most powerful man in England also became its most superstitious. Step inside the mind of a king who ruled a nation, but couldn't rule himself. He wasn't just a king. He was a living paradox, terrifying yet magnetic, divine yet decaying. Henry VIII ruled with brute force, but behind the throne lurked something far stranger than tyranny. This wasn't just a man obsessed with power. This was a man drowning in his own madness. Forget what your history books told you. The wives, just casualties. The Reformation, a smokescreen. The real story is far more twisted. Henry's daily life was a theatre of rituals, paranoia, and grotesque self-preservation. He feared death more than defeat. Every ache, every ulcer, every cough sent him into a frenzy of fear. And what did he do to calm it? Bizarre routines that would leave even his closest aides disturbed. He drank concoctions made from ground-up human remains, bathed in wine, slept surrounded by candles, holy relics, and hand-picked charms. He once refused to speak to his most trusted physician for suggesting leeches, preferring instead to rub raw meat on his rotting leg wounds, believing it would feed the evil spirits and keep them away from his soul. This wasn't eccentricity. It was obsession, control taken to an extreme. His palace became a labyrinth of superstitions, mirrors covered in cloth, doorways crossed with ash, music played for hours on loop to silence the whispers of death. Servants walked on eggshells, mistakes meant exile, sometimes worse. To the world, he was a ruler. To those inside the walls, he was something else entirely, a man unraveling, a monster in royal robes, feasting on fear, drowning in rituals and rewriting reality to fit his crumbling mind. And yet, this was just the beginning. For most, sleep is a sanctuary. For Henry VIII, it was a battlefield. He believed darkness wasn't just absence of light, it was a gateway. And through that gateway came things he couldn't control. Evil spirits, curses, the restless dead. Night after night, Henry refused to lie flat. He feared that if he did, his soul would drift too far, leaving his body vulnerable to possession. So he slept upright, propped by pillows and sheer anxiety. Around him, a circle of candles burned until dawn. No servant dared let one flicker out. His bedchamber became a fortress of superstition. Crosses carved into wood, holy water sprinkled on the walls, relics from saints laid beneath his mattress. He clutched a rosary made from bone, not for prayer, but protection. Some nights he wore a shirt stitched with verses from the Bible, believing it acted as armor against things that lurked in the shadows. But it wasn't just fear, it was performance. Every ritual was a statement that he was chosen, watched over, untouchable. Even in sleep, Henry had to dominate the unknown. He even ordered guards to whisper prayers outside his door as he drifted off, creating a constant hum of sacred sound. Yet beneath the rituals was a man unraveling. The older he got, the worse it became. Nightmares plagued him, visions of headless queens, faceless children, and a crown soaked in blood. He'd wake screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced the devil had been at his side. So he slept less, dreamed less, trusted no one. And while the kingdom slumbered, its king paced candlelit halls, wide-eyed, waiting for morning to come, terrified that one night it wouldn't. By the final decade of his life, Henry VIII was rotting from the inside out. His leg ulcers, deep, foul, and unhealing, were more than a medical problem. They became a source of shame, rage, and obsession. But instead of trusting his physicians, Henry turned to something far more primitive, something grotesque. He ordered his servants to pack his open sores with raw meat, fresh cuts of beef, lamb, even goose fat. Not bandages, not medicine, flesh. The belief that the meat would draw out the corruption, feed the bad humors, and prevent the body from consuming itself. Twice a day, the ritual began. A private chamber. 2 men in gloves. Chunks of warm, bloody meat pressed against ulcerated skin. The wounds hissed, bubbled, oozed. The stench was overwhelming. Accounts say some attendants vomited or fainted from the odor alone. Others had to be rotated out weekly, unable to endure the horror. Henry endured it in silence, not out of strength but pride. He refused to be seen as weak, as mortal. To him, the pain was proof of dominion over body, over death, over God himself. When the meat was removed, it was burned. Always burned, never buried. Henry believed that to discard it casually would invite disease back into his body through spiritual channels. This wasn't medicine. It was ritualized madness, and yet no one dared challenge it. Not his physicians, not his wives, not his priests. The man who ruled over England's fate couldn't heal himself, so he fed his wounds with flesh and fire, hoping that death would stay hungry just a little while longer. Cleanliness for Henry VIII wasn't about hygiene, it was about spectacle. His body was crumbling, but his image had to remain untouched, regal, untouchable, divine. And so every day he subjected himself to a grooming ritual so extreme, so absurd, it bordered on torture. He didn't bathe in water, he bathed in wine, barrels of it, heated, scented, and poured into custom tubs lined with silk. His physicians warned it could inflame his wounds. He didn't care. Wine, he believed, purified more than just the skin. It warded off illness, evil, and decay. Then came the shave. Not with razors, with daggers, specially forged blades with jewel-inlaid hilts. The process took hours. One slip, one wrong movement, and blood flowed. But to Henry the danger was the point. It made him feel powerful, in control. His beard was sacred. No one could trim it without permission. And if a barber irritated him, even slightly, he could be banished, or worse. But the real madness lived in his mouth. Henry's teeth were a battlefield, blackened, rotting, and painful. Yet instead of seeking relief, he chased vanity. His toothpaste, a blend of crushed pearls, vinegar, mint oil, and on rare occasions, powdered gold. Not to clean, to gleam. His gums bled, his breath reeked, but his smile, under candlelight, shimmered like treasure. That was the goal. Appearances over comfort. To the court, it was a daily performance of royal superiority, but behind closed doors, it was agony disguised as ritual. A king so obsessed with his image, he'd rather bleed for beauty than admit he was human. Because in Henry's world, pain wasn't a warning. It was proof of power. In Henry VIII's court, the bed wasn't just a place of intimacy, it was a battlefield of scrutiny, superstition, and absolute control. For any woman hoping to share it, desire alone wasn't enough. She had to meet the requirements, and they were strange. Before a woman ever touched the king's sheets, she was inspected, thoroughly. Not just for beauty or cleanliness, but for marks, specifically moles, scars, birthmarks. Each one was catalogued, counted, measured, too many, too dark, too oddly placed. She was dismissed. To Henry, moles weren't harmless spots. They were signs, omens, witches' marks. A blemish on the skin could mean a blemish on the soul, and he wouldn't risk it. Not in his bed, not near his body, but that was only the beginning. No jewelry in bed, no perfumes unless approved. Hair had to be washed with specific oils, fingernails trimmed to a royal standard. Even her breath was judged. Mint leaves were mandatory. Servants were instructed to warm the sheets beforehand. They were also ordered to remain nearby, just out of sight, in case the king's mood shifted. And it often did. Every encounter was ceremonial, controlled, timed. Some women reported they weren't allowed to speak unless spoken to. Others were given scripts, how to flatter him, how to respond, when to laugh. This wasn't romance. It was theatre. Henry didn't want connection, he wanted obedience. A stage where he was the director, the star, and the only voice that mattered. And yet beneath the rules and rituals lay a deeper fear: betrayal. He had been lied to, cheated on, humiliated. So now, every mark, every touch, every word had to be controlled. In his bedroom, there was no room for chance, only dominance, only rituals, only him. To most, rain was an inconvenience. To Henry VIII, it was a threat, a silent assassin falling from the sky. He believed every drop carried disease, plague, rot, death itself, and he treated it like an enemy. When clouds darkened and thunder cracked, panic followed, not among the people, but within the palace walls. On stormy days, windows were sealed shut, tapestries pulled tight over doorways, and fires stoked high in every chamber. The goal was simple: keep the damp out, keep death out. Henry took no chances. He layered himself in clothing, sometimes 6, even 7 garments at once. Fur-lined robes, woolen undershirts, leather gloves, and thick socks, even in summer. Sweat poured, but he refused to remove a single layer until the sky cleared. Servants were forbidden from opening windows. Even the smallest draught was treated as sabotage. One chambermaid was dismissed for leaving a window slightly ajar while the air was cursed with wetness. If rain caught him outside, chaos erupted. He had to be rushed indoors, cloaked in layers, hands scrubbed with oils. His shoes were burned, not dried, burned. He believed rain left a lingering poison that clung to cloth and leather. Doctors tried to calm him, priests offered reassurance, but logic meant nothing to a king who had buried friends, wives, and children. In his mind, death came wet and cold, and he would not let it touch him. So while his subjects worked the fields, soaked and coughing, their king paced dry halls, wrapped in fabric and fear. Because to Henry, the greatest threat wasn't rebellion or betrayal. It was the sky itself. There was always music in Henry's court, but not the kind you'd expect. Beneath the pageantry, behind closed doors, a single tune echoed endlessly. A slow, mournful lullaby, soft, eerie, and strange. It wasn't for celebration, it wasn't for guests, it was for him. Henry paid a group of minstrels to play the same song over and over for hours at a time. No variations, no flourishes, just repetition. The melody told the story of a dead prince, young, innocent, taken too soon. A fictional child, some said. Others believed it was about someone real, maybe someone Henry had lost, maybe someone he feared becoming. He claimed the song kept him grounded, that it reminded him of the fragility of kingship, of the thin line between power and the grave. But to those who heard it, the effect was haunting. Servants reported feeling cold in rooms where it played. Courtiers whispered that the music changed Henry's mood, slowing his speech, darkening his stare, making him speak to shadows as if they were old friends. He demanded it at dawn, at meals, before sleep. Sometimes in the middle of a meeting, he'd stop everything and summon the musicians, then sit, silent, staring into space as the melody filled the chamber. No one questioned it. No one dared. When one minstrel tried to adjust the tempo, he was never seen at court again. The tune became a ghost in the palace, familiar, dreaded, as if the walls themselves had learned to hum it. To the outside world, Henry VIII was a roaring lion. But within the palace, behind velvet curtains and drawn blinds, he sat listening to the same lullaby of death, again and again, waiting for silence to swallow it whole. Henry VIII ruled not just over people, but over beasts. His palace teemed with animals, monkeys in jeweled collars, peacocks strutting through the halls, greyhounds with silk capes. He even kept a lion, chained in a private enclosure, fed only by select handlers. To Henry, these creatures weren't pets. They were symbols of majesty, domination, and divine right. But the line between performance and madness didn't just blur, it shattered. One year, a pig wandered into the royal gardens, harmless, clueless. But after rooting through a flowerbed planted in memory of one of Henry's sons, it was captured and brought before the king. Henry, fuming, called it an insult to royal blood. Then came the unthinkable. He held a trial. Yes, an actual court proceeding. Witnesses were summoned. A clerk read formal charges. Treasonous destruction of royal property. The pig stood tethered in the center of the chamber as nobles tried to stifle disbelief. But no one laughed. Laughter in that moment could cost you everything. A defender was appointed, more actor than advocate. He pleaded the pig's ignorance. Henry remained unmoved. The sentence? Death. The pig was hanged in the palace yard. Servants wept with confusion. Others watched in silence, unable to comprehend what they'd just witnessed. But Henry? He called it justice. Proof that no being, man or beast, was above the law of the crown. This wasn't about the animal. It was about control, theatre, fear. When a king can make a courtroom bend to judge a pig, what can't he command? And so, in a palace filled with music and madness, even the animals weren't safe from the performance. Because in Henry's court, every living thing served a role, even if it ended at the noose. He was a king desperate to outrun death, and in Henry VIII's world, vitality came at a price, one measured in human dust. Among the royal elite, one so-called cure rose to terrifying popularity. Mumia, a dark, fine powder made from ground-up human remains. Often Egyptian mummies, sometimes freshly buried criminals. Mixed with honey, wine, or crushed herbs, it was swallowed, smeared on wounds, or even stirred into warm milk. Henry believed it gave him strength. To him, this wasn't cannibalism. It was medicine, sacred, ancient, powerful. But the truth was far more disturbing. Suppliers dug up graves to meet demand. Traders sold counterfeit versions made from dried beggars or plague victims. But Henry insisted on the real thing. He ordered it imported directly from the Middle East. Apothecaries were given strict instructions. Only royal grade remains. He didn't want mystery meat. He wanted kings in his cup. He consumed mumia for everything. Headaches, fevers, fatigue. His physicians called it a miracle, but what it really was ritual. The illusion of control. A king swallowing death to escape it. Sometimes, during banquets, he'd even raise a glass and joke, "To the fallen pharaohs!" No one laughed. They drank too. Because saying no wasn't an option. But the irony couldn't be darker. While Henry consumed the dead to extend his life, his own body decayed, ulcers worsening, teeth blackening, mind fraying. He was, in the end, a man trying to patch rot with ashes. Yet to Henry, each dose was a victory, a small defiance. He couldn't conquer time, but he could devour it, one powdered corpse at a time. And still, the shadow grew. To rule was to be hunted, and Henry VIII knew it. Every plate placed before him was a potential weapon, every bite a risk. He didn't eat. He calculated. No dish reached the king's mouth without ritual. 3 separate tasters, 3 different stages, one before the meal was served, one in front of the king, and one, sometimes hours earlier, kept under watch to see if the taster would survive. Only after all 3 passed did Henry touch his fork. Even then, he watched his food like a hawk. The wrong aroma, the wrong texture, a spice too strong, suspicion, a sauce too smooth, treason. One cook learned this the hard way. He prepared a hearty soup, rich, fragrant, complex, too complex. Henry took one sip, scowled, and demanded the man be arrested on the spot. The charge? Suspiciously excessive seasoning. The chef was thrown in the tower. No poison was ever found. But the fear had done its job. Henry trusted no one in the kitchens. Recipes were locked in vaults. Ingredients were counted. Even salt was measured, tracked, inspected. Food became less about taste, more about safety. He banned certain foods entirely. Mushrooms, berries, unfamiliar spices. If he hadn't eaten it as a child, he wouldn't risk it now. Foreign dishes, forbidden, Offers of gifts or exotic delicacies from ambassadors? Politely declined. Or fed to dogs. Every meal was served under supervision. Knives were inspected. Cups were glass, never metal. He feared hidden toxins. And while the court feasted, the king often picked at crumbs, chewing slowly, eyes darting. Not because he wasn't hungry, but because he was always ready to die. In the end, Henry didn't dine. He defended himself, with a fork in one hand and fear in the other. Henry VIII didn't just fear death, he feared the air itself. To him, disease didn't spread by touch. It floated, invisible, in cold draughts. He called them plague vapors, ghost-like poisons that slipped in through cracks, rode the wind, and struck without warning. His solution? Fire, relentless, suffocating fire. He ordered hearths lit in every room of every palace, not just in winter, but year-round. Dining halls, corridors, bedrooms, even storage chambers. If it had walls, it had to have flames. Servants fed them day and night. Buckets of coal, stacks of timber, rivers of sweat. In July, the heat was unbearable. Courtiers collapsed, maids fainted. One footman was found unconscious outside the great hall. He'd simply overheated. Henry's response? The weak burn before the wicked. He believed warmth was holy, clean, a purifier of air, mind, and flesh. He sat beside roaring fireplaces wrapped in layers, his ulcerated legs propped on cushions, sweat pooling under his robes. The more he ached, the hotter the flames burned. Windows were sealed, curtains drawn, rooms became ovens. Still, the fires blazed. He even had portable braziers carried before him when he moved between chambers, like a mobile shield against the invisible. Doctors begged him to stop. They warned of heat stroke, dehydration, madness. But Henry ignored them. Fire made him feel safe. It was light in darkness, order in chaos, life against death. He wasn't just warming rooms. He was building barriers between his body and the world he could no longer control. And so, his palaces glowed like furnaces. Not with comfort, but with fear. A king slowly roasting himself alive to keep his demons out. When Henry VIII buried an enemy, the grave wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a ritual, one soaked in dominance, spite, and fire. He didn't just outlive his rivals, he erased them. Whenever someone he despised died, an advisor who betrayed him, a noble who crossed him, a wife who disappointed him, Henry observed a private tradition. He'd raise a goblet, toast their memory with cold precision, and utter a phrase only a few ever heard. Dust to silence. Then came the destruction. Their former chambers were stripped bare, furniture smashed, drapes burned, walls torn down, stone by stone. The ashes were buried far from the palace, sometimes in unmarked pits. It didn't matter who the person was, a court favorite, a family member, even a former queen. Once dead, they were fair game for oblivion. Nothing they touched was allowed to remain. Portraits vanished, letters were confiscated, servants who had worked with them were reassigned, questioned, or dismissed. It wasn't about grief, it was about control. Legacy, erasure. One of the most infamous cases involved Anne Boleyn. After her execution, her quarters were not merely emptied, they were gutted. Tapestries shredded, floorboards ripped up. Henry ordered the chimney dismantled, brick by brick, and rebuilt elsewhere, so its smoke would rise without memory. Witnesses were disturbed, but silent. To question the ritual was to risk joining it. Henry didn't mourn. He purged. The dead weren't gone until he made sure they couldn't come back, not in memory, not in stone. Because to Henry, death was only half the punishment. The rest was erasure, total, merciless, final. Near the end, Henry VIII no longer resembled a king. He resembled a corpse in silk. Bloated, ulcer-ridden, barely able to walk, he was a shadow of the man who once ruled with fire. But history would not see him that way, not if he could help it. His final portrait was not a likeness. It was a lie. He commissioned the painting with strict instructions. No sores, no swelling, no signs of pain. The face was to be stern, godlike. The frame, broad, commanding. The eyes, sharp. The result, a towering image of strength, regal, defiant, unbreakable. The truth, he could barely stand without assistance, but there was something else, something buried in the canvas. A code. Hidden in the folds of his robe were faint symbols. Some say they were astrological signs, others believed they were religious ciphers. One section of the hem, magnified, revealed a stitched Latin phrase, Non videbis me cadere. Translation, you will not see me fall. It was more than pride. It was fear, weaponized through art. A king trying to outlive his body with paint and secrecy. The artist, court painter, Hans Holbein's successor, was sworn to silence, paid handsomely, threatened quietly. The original sketches, showing the real Henry, sagging flesh, gaping wounds, sunken eyes, were destroyed in a private fire. Only the final version survived. To the public it was a portrait of a legend. To those who knew better, it was a portrait of denial. This was Henry's final performance. One last illusion of power. Not for glory, not for legacy, but to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that he hadn't already begun to rot. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be imagined. They teach you about the 6 wives, the broken church, the beheadings, the wars, but they don't teach you about the man behind the crown, the one pacing candlelit halls, drenched in sweat, muttering prayers to ward off shadows. Henry VIII wasn't just a king drunk on power. He was a man unraveling, paranoid, obsessive, and dangerously superstitious. He feared sleep, feared food, feared the air, the rain, even the walls of his own palace. He built rituals around every part of his life, twisted routines that gave him the illusion of control while everything else decayed. He believed disease could ride on wind, that music could silence ghosts, that raw meat could feed the evil festering in his flesh. He consumed the dead, burned the living from memory, and kept his court in a constant state of performance and fear. This wasn't eccentricity. It was rot, masked by robes and jewels, and yet those parts of him are missing from the polished portraits, whitewashed from classrooms. History prefers the sanitized version, the powerful king, the political mastermind, the tragic lover, not the man who put pigs on trial, not the man who toasted his enemies before erasing their names. Why? Because power protects its own image, and Henry made sure of it. His portraits lied, his scribes obeyed, his madness was buried beneath thrones and titles. But if you peel back the gold and velvet, you find something else, a man at war with his own body, his own mind, and the invisible forces he believed stalked him. That's the truth they don't teach, not because it isn't real, but because it's far too real, and far too close to the kings that came after.